Hi, and welcome to the Route to CISO podcast. It's me, Chris Rides. I'm going to be your host, and I'm going to be chatting to seasoned Chief Information Security Officers about their career journeys. We're going to be unencrypting their real-life stories and searching for the hidden keys to help you fast-track your cybersecurity career. Season 2 of the Route to CISO podcast. I'm lucky enough today to be joined by Kristina Belnap. Kristina, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's lovely having you here. So thank you so much. Kristina's another person that was introduced to me by Larry Tritchu, who was, I think, our third episode of season 1. And Larry's been so good at introducing me to people. So thank you so much for Larry. And again, you know, it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Larry had said good things about you, actually. So
he did. That's good. It's costing me. I keep sending him these checks. He said that he would keep saying good things as long as the checks keep coming. So yeah, I haven't paid the mortgage for 2 months, but at least he's saying good things. Well, look, I think let's jump in. If you can tell us a bit about what you're up to currently, I think that's a great place to start, and then we'll get diving into your career.
So right now I am looking for a new position. Until the end of last year, I was the CSO at an insurance company, and it just wasn't a good fit for either them or me. And so I am now in a place where I am looking for what would be a good fit. You know, something where I can make a difference, where security is considered an important fundamental part of the company.
Oh, I totally understand that. I think I know a lot of CISOs and have known a lot of CISOs for a long time now, and finding your right place to be where you can really feel like you're making a difference and where you're doing things for the right reasons, I think is a good way. And I don't know your situation, so I'm talking very generally here, but I generally feel like we're a bunch of really good people, and CISOs want to make a difference, and they don't always get the opportunity to do that at every place they work. So
exactly. Just, you know, you want to make sure that you being there is good for the company, good for, you know, what's happening in the world, for everything, and not just you're filling a chair.
Yes.
That's hugely important to me.
Which is an interesting thing, really, because at the moment, or at least we'll see with the current administration, but obviously with the previous one, there's been quite a lot of pressure on. We see CISOs being taken to court, CISOs, you know, getting in a lot of trouble for doing things, and I think there's a bit of a trouble with the balance now, because you've got CISOs that are like, I told you this was important and this is why we need to do it. And then the buck stops with me. And so now at some point, you've got to make quite tough decisions that, you know, if I can't get this sort of thing done, then actually I can't work here, because it's now my head on the chopping block.
And that is something that I very much took into consideration. And I'm not saying that there was anything illegal or anything like that going on. Yeah. It's just, you know, it was a difference in opinion or view of what it meant to be secure and what it meant to have a CSO. And we very much disagreed.
And that happens. Yeah, it happens a lot. And the funny thing is with that is sometimes, you know, we hear about the importance of reporting structures and other things. And sometimes it's reporting structures. Sometimes it's just the people you report into. Like, I know people that would say to me, I will never report into a CTO. And then I have other people and they're like, oh, I report to a CTO, and the CTO I report through are great, right? I really get on well with this person. They understand security. There isn't any like conflict here, and they support me when I want to do stuff. So I think sometimes it's just the people you work for and work with rather than, you know, the titles, I suspect.
Most of the time it's the people who really, I mean, and I agree with what you said there. I would prefer not to report to a CTO. However, I have, and sometimes that has really, really been good. I've been a CIO CTO, and security was very important to me, but it's not always.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Different priorities, and the bit balancing the business priorities and often making them understand. It's harsh lesson when they learn through like a big issue. And even when, and you see this all the time with some of the biggest, you know, the biggest hacks that we see, the stuff that's reported, that the CISOs usually have been asking for more money, more staff. We're very bad. I mean, you know, I work in the recruitment business, and so I see this a lot, but the number of understaffed teams that are working like beyond the time they should be. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of people in our industry struggle with stress and pressure,
Yeah.
because, that in some cases it pays very well. And so companies think that you're getting paid well. So therefore you have to deal with that stress. But there's a kind of balance to make with all of that stuff, right? I think so.
I was talking to a friend that I mentor yesterday, and he said that he was applying for a role that was a CISO role for a global company, and the team he would be stepping into if he took this role was four people in a global company for all of security. It sometimes is surprising to me.
Yeah, it's crazy. I've been working on sort of a pilot project which is related to some stuff that was originally driven by the last administration, the White House, although a lot of the people are still there, and then some people at CISA, and talking to critical infrastructure related CISOs.
Right.
And I just, some of the stuff that I've learned over the last 6 months that I just had no idea, the fact that a lot of our critical infrastructure are smaller companies, or at least smaller departments, not very big, no
Yeah.
dedicated CSOs or a single person that does everything,
Yeah.
tech, so, CTO, CISO,
Every
they do the whole lot,
You're the
very little
guy.
budget. Right, totally. It's like worrying actually, and I can understand why there are a lot of concerns around our critical infrastructure. There have been for a while, and I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in the coming year with that and with funding. I can see some areas that I think need to be funded, and actually I think maybe the current administration might think along similar lines
I hope
with
so.
it. Yeah, I think so, because I think that there definitely is funding requirements. I think some of the funding has been used in places where they they thought it was the right place to use it, but now you look back and it hasn't had the results. And I can,
Right.
from the 6 month stuff I've done, I can see why that's been the case. But anyway, we're getting so far off. Look at it. I told you it'd be like a conversation. We've gone so far off the subject. There's probably people watching, tuning in and like, when are we going to get into Kristina's, like, her career? Like, what's her career journey, Chris? You two have just been chatting about being a CISO and critical infrastructure. That's got nothing to do with this podcast. Well, it kind of has. So there you go.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Well, look, let's go back and start at the sort of early stages of your career, even pre-career. What was your foundation sort of prior to even getting into cyber?
So I did not start in cyber, and I actually didn't start in technology. Well, I was teaching school here, and I'd gone college teaching school, and my husband was always a techie. He was very, and we were sitting at dinner, and he was talking to me in this language I had absolutely no understanding of. I was like, okay. So I went and got some certifications in technology, so I would understand his. We could have dinner conversation, so we could talk. That I really enjoyed technology, so I continued for a while. I taught in technology, so I taught at tech schools. I taught the network and database design program, and from there I went into leading the program, and from there it just kind of bloomed out. One of the things that I found in leading the program was the accreditation process, which is very similar to our GRC, making sure you're doing all those things. I very much enjoyed that, which most people don't. So,
Yeah.
so it was definitely a way to get in. I did a lot of that, and then I started doing some consulting around, so I did audits for things like PCI, for HIPAA, for all of these different, what is it, the judicial one. And
Yeah.
I really very much enjoyed that kind of thing. From there, I actually moved into doing technology. I became the IT guy, where I was actually, we moved buildings, and it was back before everything was VoIP, and I was punching in the telephone lines. That was the kind of thing that I
Under
really.
desks, yeah, the cables going, yeah.
Yep. Knowledge people and those kind of things. And it was, I did that for a manufacturing firm, which was really quite fun. You get to be out there seeing the floor of the, manufacturing, and the company I worked for did airbag cams. So we work both with the military because they have some of these things in the airplanes, and then with car companies, which again, it was just an immensely enjoyable learning experience. From there, I moved into the finance area. So in finance, there's always going to be a lot of need for, even before it was cyber, for cyber. You have to make sure you're hitting all of the, and so I worked at both Lehman's Bank, and then I worked as the CIO, again, the IT guy, basically. I think I had team 4 for another bank in the area. I worked in gaming, and then from there in the gaming and in the IT, my first, where I was a CIO of this local bank. It was in Vegas and in Utah. I did they were having problems when I came in. They asked me to come in and replace a CIO who they were concerned was being dishonest, and in fact he was. But the FDIC was, sometimes they'd come in with so many people, there would be more FDIC than there were people in the bank. But I met with the board on a monthly basis, and one of my jobs was to teach them cyber, help them to understand what to move forward. And there are these older, let's say, I probably the youngest was 75, white guys who'd been in banking for their whole career. And it was interesting. One time, one of them was really quite upset with the group, and he insisted that all the women leave the room so that he could swear at them. So it was that kind of an environment.
Wait. Say that again.
So he was really upset with the rest of the board, and there was 3 of us women in the room. I was there. The woman who was taking notes, who was the admin, was there, and then there was the woman who was in charge of HR was there. And he insisted that we all had to leave the room because he wanted to swear.
He wanted to swear. Didn't want to swear in front of you.
And he couldn't swear in front of women. Now, the funny thing is that my office, the wall in my office was, the wall of the conference room, so I could hear everything.
And I'm sure it wasn't like stuff you've never heard before, right?
I in Vegas. I mean, and sometimes I use that same language.
Yeah.
But it was that type of an environment. So teaching them, these people, cyber was really an interesting. That's really where I started to enjoy cyber the most. I'd already understood that I liked the GRC portions of it, but I really learned that I liked cyber when I was teaching it to them. And one of the things that I had to teach them, and it's not so much anymore, is when you're out in public, do not just attach to whatever network is there. So this was several years ago, and one of them had a friend, or son, I'm sorry, his son would go to Starbucks all the time. And he came home and told him, you shouldn't do that. Our cyber person tells us that you have to be very careful. And his son was like, sure, whatever. But by the next month, his son had been hacked from that. And he got to come in and say, I told him so, and it was so great. And so that was, when you get people who start to listen, who start to care, it really becomes much more enjoyable. That was my first real, hey, I want to move into that industry
and be more dedicated for it. And that's interesting, because you are right. When it actually impacts a member of their family, yes, and they can talk about it in a way that they're like, oh, look, I'm using the knowledge. And I think it's like anything you get taught, right? If you don't use it, then you lose it.
Yes. Exactly.
That's amazing. Now, before we go into the next steps after that, what was your background before getting into sort of tech? You were teaching. Did you go to college?
Yes, at the University of Utah, and then I taught speech and debate in high school. My dad was a speech and debate coach, and I got scholarships in it, so that it just seemed natural. Which is funny now, because I don't really enjoy public speaking, but right, it was something that really got me to where I needed to be. So
it's amazing how some of the stuff you do, and I think that's important for a lot of people. Like, a lot of people didn't come through the typical, I've got a Bachelor of Science in IT or whatever, and then I will work straight in IT. Or even nowadays, there's an expectation of walking straight into a security job. So many people don't have that, and it's the rounded backgrounds and that's what's coming out of these conversations. It's the rounded backgrounds of all of the stuff that made the foundation that have probably one of the biggest impacts in getting people up to that CISO level, which I think is I find it almost, I mean, hopefully it's inspiring, but I find it interesting because I think there's a lot of people there that are kicking themselves that I'm not yet in cyber, or I'm doing this degree and I've not done this, and I'm going to have to take a job in IT to get in there, or whatever. And then even these people that are in completely different careers,
Mm-hmm.
like you, that are passionate and interested in it and are doing courses, and like think that perhaps some of their time and the stuff they've done before is a waste, when in fact it can be really impactful in their cyber career. So this is great. Did you study, what did you study at
No,
college?
I did just a normal for teaching. So
Teaching,
it
right?
wasn't, yeah, so it wasn't anything that had to do. I did take a couple of computer classes because they were required, but nothing. My husband has, the what is it, the degree in management of IT or information.
Yeah,
That was just never, I have done mostly certs to get me there.
that's
So
brilliant. And
yeah,
that's great because like every CISO I speak to all have a very different background, or mostly have quite a different background, and many of them don't come from what people say the traditional
right.
is. Um, and so that's really good to hear. And we're going to talk more about your career so people can understand where you've gone to since then. But it's really good to hear the kind of different backgrounds and the different things you're doing and you have done, because again, like, shows people that all of these things have an impact in your future. And just because you're doing this now doesn't mean you can't be doing this later.
Right. And I actually truly believe that if you come straight up through technology and you've never really done anything else, you lose a lot of the well-roundedness that you need to be a good leader. So if you only have technology, you've only done those kind of things, you don't have some of the other experiences that make you someone who can talk to a board, or who can talk to the rest of the company about why, and help change mindsets. It's very difficult to do if you're not a little bit more out there. I would think it would be much more difficult for me if I had always been in technology, if I had never had experience outward. And I think actually even consulting and seeing how different, I've done government consulting, I've done private industry, and so seeing how other types of industries work is very important too. I was at Health Equity, which is, it's both health and finance. I have been in banking, I've been in gaming. I've done a lot of consulting, and being able to see the different ways different companies or, industries do things is hugely helpful in being able to do a lot of what you have to do. I would I would actually encourage people who don't come up through technology to look into security, because it's one of the few um, one of the few skill sets that you're going to use wherever you go.
Right. Yes, yes. And it's important. And the thing I've found interesting is over the last few years, when I told my family, my parents, I was starting a business doing cybersecurity recruitment back in 2012. They were like, "What is that?" And then now it's, within a year or two of saying that, they're sending me news articles, right?
Yeah.
And asking me about these emails they've received, or, they had a strange phone call and that sort of
Mhm.
stuff, right? So, you know how that all goes, but it's so publicly talked about now, and it's changed so much over the last few years, that it's very out there. People do know what's going on, and people are aware that it's a great career. And so that's often why people want to jump straight into it and see some of these great big salaries, and they don't always come that quickly. They
Not
will come if you're doing a good job, but
Yeah,
you know
but it's like any other career. You have to pay some of your dues, and you have to work your way up. You have to learn. Being book smart is
absolutely.
nowhere near the same as being, I've been in the industry, I've seen this, I've done this. Having
Yes.
the hands-on smarts is so much more important for being able to do things.
Yeah, well, I imagine if, until you've been in an incident, or you've been under that pressure, or had to stand in front of a board and talk to them about some
Mhm.
difficult stuff, till you've had done all of those stuff, is going to be very
To clients
challenging.
on
Yeah,
the phone, hey, just so you know, this is what's happened, this is what we can tell you, this is where we're at. It's an entirely different situation.
yeah. Now, going back to your career, you were
Mhm.
talking about being a CIO, four people under you. One of the tough things that people often see as like part of, one of the things, and we'll talk about that, sort of getting into cybersecurity. And it sounds like with your career, it's kind of been a gradual thing because you've had it get involved
Yeah,
more and more with the jobs you're doing anyway, which I think is how a lot of people even now will find their way into cybersecurity.
right.
But the other thing is, I think a lot of people find it a challenge of making the step up from being an individual contributor and then becoming a leader, even if it's a small team initially. How did that happen for you?
So for me, I I tend to be a leader. So, in most of the careers, I will start, at the school. I started off as a teacher, and then I became the head teacher, and then I became the department chair. And those, it's just, I tend to be a leader. However, for me, it was moving from technology, which is what I was doing at the time, into cyber, um, is a little bit, I wanted to get a good foundation. And so I went from being the CIO to taking a IT security manager role so that I could get cyber on my resume. So you could see that I had done it, and it was a significant salary change, which, if you can do it, it works out nicely, but it's hard to take that big.
Yeah.
It was probably 50% off. But
Wow.
I got through. And again, I moved up the ranks and got to the point where I was a CISO there. So learning if you're only in technology, I think it is very difficult because technicians tend to have a very different mindset than leaders. And if you're doing really great at technology, you're told then your next step is to move into management. And sometimes that is your next step and it's great for you, but a lot of times it really isn't going to be good for you. And it's not where your passions lie. And I think in this country in particular, people aren't told that there's a lot of movement that you can move up as a technician without having to be a people leader and still be very successful.
Yes. Yeah. Companies have got amazingly good at actually demonstrating, especially more recently. I'd say the things I've seen probably the last 5 years is like the bigger companies anyway, realizing that if we're going to keep hold of these technicians or these technical people, the engineering people that just they don't want to be managers, or maybe we give them a try of doing it and they don't like it and ask to come back, but the feeling of coming back leaves them with this thought process of, what do I do now? Is my career stagnated?
Yes.
um when in fact it might be the wrong time. It might be completely the wrong thing, but it could be just the wrong time as well. And I think many companies have now been able to start putting together, and certainly bigger companies are better at this than most, but put together a pathway where they say, right, you can be an engineer one, an engineer two, an engineer three, a senior engineer, a principal
Principle.
engineer, and
Yes.
a security architect, right?
Exactly.
And so there've been ways of putting these processes together, where people can have a full career and get paid as good as some CISOs are being
Sometimes
paid,
even better
right?
than
Sometimes better.
yeah.
Yeah. And
So
and do that. So that's a great, yeah, I love that point.
one of the things that I like to tell my teams when we're working is that I feel like you should always train your people up so that they can go anywhere, but treat them in a way that they want to stay with you. So we look for how can we get you to where you want to be. So you want to be a principal architect. Well, you've got like 4 steps in between there. So what's your first step? How are we going to, that's the kind of thing I think is hugely important as a head of a team, is making sure you understand the reasoning or the passion behind your team members to help them to move forward, to keep them in a place where they feel satisfied or challenged, but not challenged to the point where they feel hopeless. So you have to find that perfect balance of, it's a little bit above them, and it's going to be, work for them to get there, but it's work that they're going to love. That's where, you can really keep your technicians. And, right now, sometimes, I don't know right now but in the past, technicians had a lot of opportunity to go from place to place to place to place, particularly during the pandemic. It was easy to job hunt, a job drop, and just get, move up and up and up. Not so easy as it used to be, but for a long time you could just do that. And so now people are looking at, how can I stay here and be happy?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think companies are, let's say companies are getting wiser to that as well, right? You want to keep your best people. You want to stop. And I think it happens in every industry. It's funny. I was listening to a podcast. I'm a big soccer fan. So
Mhm.
I was listening to a podcast about some footballers, and they were talking about how some of the people that came through, like the junior football, the youth football scene, were then not on as good a contracts as the people that they then brought in. And that's very similar to our industry, very similar to multiple
Right.
others. And so what you would find is these people that had come all the way through, even though they loved the club, they didn't want to move, they would have to move to get their salary
Yes.
where it should be. And I think football clubs have realized that. And I think companies are starting to realize that just because you've promoted somebody all the way through, you can't underpay them for the job they're doing. If they're good enough to do that job, they deserve to be paid the same as what you're bringing in everybody else to be paid at.
And I used to say, we can pay this person less, when we're arguing, and then they're going to go find another job. And now I'm going to have to bring somebody else in at a higher cost and spend 6 months getting them up to the point where they were doing pretty the same amount of work that this person's going to do immediately. This does not seem fiscally responsible to me to do it this way.
Yeah, doesn't make any sense. And just because you've got rules that say people can only get a 3% or a 5% raise every year, that's not going to help you out. And it takes some companies to feel the pain of losing people before they realize that you can give somebody 15-20% and not have them leave to do it.
Yeah. And it actually, the 15 to 20% is a bargain compared to what it's going to cost if those people leave and you have to bring in more. It really truly is.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I don't know whether I would love more companies to listen to that, but then the flip side is then they would be recruiting less. So maybe from a selfish point of view, some of you should definitely keep underpaying your staff so that I can take them out and pass them somewhere else. And then I can help you backfill as well,
a little bit better, and then you can help them backfill.
Yes, exactly. So when we were finishing off, we were just talking about you being a CIO for people and getting passionate about security at the bank. What was your next step after that?
So my next step is where the FDIC closed the bank. We knew that was coming. That was part of it. I was kept on to help with all of that. And so as I was looking through that, and again, I did a lot of the forensic work there to help them with the forensic work with the bank. And I, again, loved it. I decided that I wanted to go into security. So that's when I took the IT security manager role.
Wow.
And it was interesting. I'd gone from, whatever I said went, this is how we're going to do things, to reporting up to a director who reported up to the CIO, which was much different for me. But again, I think that taught me a lot about how to be able to lead up, how to be able to lead across, how to make sure that you are making a difference where you are. Those kind of things I think are hugely important. And sometimes we miss those steps in understanding the growth process. During that period of time, I started off there with, it was funny, I had a team of 6 starting there, whereas as a CIO, I had a smaller team. But it really helped me to understand the company, to where, because I was a different place now. 2 months in to that role, my team, there was a security team that I wasn't part of. I was IT security. This was a whole security team, but my team found a breach. We worked through it. We brought the security team in. We did a lot of this, and I spent the next 2 months doing just what you were talking about. We had to, to reach out to all of our customers, but we also had to reach out to all of the regulators. We had to work through, we had to put together a plan. This is how we're going to make sure it's not going to happen again. This is what went wrong. This is where we're at. Once you've gone through that, we called it the opera, weeks going through the opera with this is what happened. This is the timeline. This is what you can expect. These are your people. It really gives you a whole different perspective. And once that happened, they brought in they brought in Larry.
Okay.
Moved me under him and, changed everything. It was such a different way of doing things. And one of the things that, don't tell him I said this. So, great leader. I mean, he really helped to help the company, not just the security team, but to help the company understand the significance of what cyber means, and not, protecting data, making sure you understand. That was a thing, it was a startup, and then it had gotten bigger, and now we're at this place. But the understanding of knowing where your data is and who can see it, those are the things that you have to start getting people to be aware of in order for them to understand what's happening. So that was a fun thing to get to go through as well.
If you don't know where your data is, it's hard to keep it secure, right?
It sure is.
That's so you're saying such good stuff about Larry there. I'm starting to wonder whether all these checks I'm sending him, he's sending on to you. Is that how this world goes? I need to know, right, who do I need to say some good things about here? I need some checks sent my way. This is what we need. And so you worked for Larry. Whereabouts was that?
So that was here in Utah. It was Health Equity, which is HSA company. Again, he was the CISO, and then as his role continued to expand, he had IT put under him as well, and so I was made the CISO there, and he was the CISO over all of IT and security, which was really great. By the time I left there, I had 45 people on my team. So wow. it was really a difference. You know, we started the whole identity program and had a really solid identity program going. We had the third party going. We had the data security going. You know, we had our SOC. I mean, it was just, you know, we had incident response, and we did a lot of really fun things there. So it was just such a different program than me going to the CIO. I mean, the CIO and I working together saying, hey, I think this is bad. What's happening here? I think this is actually a breach. It was so much more formalized, and people had, you know, we did a lot of security training, and it just was such a better system.
That's amazing. It sounds like you put together an amazing program, especially coming in and a couple of months in, having to be dealing with
it was interesting. And the sad thing is, you know, they had just gone to 0365. So, you know, and the people who'd put it in were a little bit unsure. But what had happened was, you know, we had a business email compromise. And because this was, you know, kind of still the wild, wild west, there was a gentleman who had a spreadsheet in his email that was 11 years old that had all sorts of information, like 600,000 lines. And that was what caused all of our issue.
It's crazy. Sometimes it's it's often the human factor, right? People saving stuff like that, not even thinking about it, probably had it in there from years before. Yeah. Even if you have a conversation about security, there's no doubt that, like, is somebody thinking about an email or Excel sheet somewhere?
Or even if they do, they just delete it, and then they don't look in their deleted folder, and it's still sitting right
there. That's amazing. Well, look, I reckon this is a great spot to finish our first part. Time's gone, right? It's gone quickly. And so this will be we'll end part one here, and I'll thank our audience for joining us, and I'm going to thank Kristina, even though she's going to still be here. You won't see this again for another week, but we're going to be back in a few seconds with part two. But for you, it'll be another week. So thank you very much for joining us. We'll carry on talking about Kristina's career, and we'll start digging into some other CISOs that she's worked for and worked with. Good things to say about those, and a little bit about recruitment as well. So watch this space. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and come back for part two next week. Thanks, Kristina.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Route to CISO podcast. If there's something you really want me to ask on the next episode, or if you're a CISO who wants to inspire the next generation, please reach out. I'll leave a URL to my LinkedIn profile, and make sure you connect and message me there. We're always looking for feedback, so please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.